The scream that echoed through Kettle Ridge at 2:17 a.m. on March 15, 1979, lasted exactly 4 seconds before the mountains swallowed it whole. By dawn, 6 college students had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only scattered camping gear and a single tent stake driven so deep into the rocky soil that rescue teams needed a crowbar to extract it. This isn't just another missing persons case from Appalachian folklore. It's the documented beginning of what investigators would later call the most methodical hunting operation in American criminal history. The mountains of eastern Kentucky have always harbored secrets. Kettle Ridge, in particular, rose like a serrated blade against the sky, its slopes thick with rhododendron and mountain laurel that created natural corridors perfect for funneling prey. The air carried the perpetual scent of decomposing leaves and iron-rich creek water, while every footstep sank slightly into the spongy forest floor that had been accumulating organic matter for centuries. Local guides warned that the ridge played tricks on sound, making voices seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Hallowell family had called these mountains home for 5 generations. Mortimer Hallowell, the patriarch, owned nearly 3,000 acres of prime hunting land that stretched from Devil's Backbone Creek to the old Cherokee trail markers. His property included some of the most isolated camping spots in the region, clearings that appeared on no official maps but were passed down through word of mouth among outdoor enthusiasts seeking true wilderness experiences. What campers didn't realize was that they were entering a carefully maintained hunting preserve. State police investigator Drusilla Claymore had been tracking unusual disappearances in the region since 1976. Her files contained 17 separate incidents of missing hikers, hunters, and camping groups, all within a 15-mile radius of Kettle Ridge. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Groups would check in at local supply stores, purchase provisions, ask for directions to remote camping areas, then simply disappear. No distress calls. No abandoned vehicles found weeks later on mountain roads. Nothing. The missing persons reports painted a consistent picture. Young adults, typically college-aged, traveling in small groups of 4 to 8 people. They favored spring and summer camping trips, always requested the most isolated locations, and invariably mentioned they wanted to get completely off the grid for several days. Someone was listening. The Fairhurst College Spring Break Expedition represented the largest group to go missing. 8 students from the university's outdoor recreation club had planned a 5-day backpacking trip through the Kettle Ridge backcountry. Their faculty advisor, Professor Emmeline Fairhurst, had helped them secure camping permits for what the local ranger station euphemistically called primitive wilderness areas, locations where campers were entirely responsible for their own safety and rescue operations could take days to organize. The group's last confirmed sighting occurred at Wentworth's General Store in the town of Millfield, population 237. Store owner Obadiah Wentworth later told investigators that the college students had seemed unusually well prepared, carrying high-quality gear and detailed topographical maps. They'd purchased extra batteries, first aid supplies, and enough food for a week-long expedition. Nice kids, Wentworth recalled during his police interview. Asked smart questions about weather patterns, wildlife, local customs, the kind of preparation that usually keeps people safe out there. But preparation meant nothing when the danger came from other human beings. The Hallowell hunting operation had been perfecting its methods for decades. Family patriarch Mortimer had learned tracking and trapping from his grandfather, skills originally developed for hunting bear and wild boar in the dense mountain terrain. Over time, these techniques had been adapted for a different kind of quarry, one that required far more sophisticated planning and coordination. The family maintained an extensive network of informants throughout the region. Store clerks, gas station attendants, motel operators, and even some park rangers provided information about incoming groups. License plate numbers, group sizes, planned destinations, equipment inventories, all carefully recorded and passed along through a communication system that had operated undetected for years. The mountains had eyes. When the Fairhurst College group established their base camp in what they believed was an isolated clearing near Ravens Gulch, they had no way of knowing that the site had been specifically prepared for them. The clearing had been subtly modified over several seasons, deadfall strategically placed to create natural barriers, underbrush cleared to provide clear sight lines, and most importantly, the tree canopy thinned just enough to allow moonlight to illuminate the entire area during nighttime hours. The attack began at precisely 2 a.m., when human circadian rhythms reached their lowest point, and even trained outdoors enthusiasts sleep most deeply. The Hallowell family had studied their prey's habits extensively. They knew that college students typically stayed up later around campfires, consumed alcohol that further deepened their sleep, and relied on modern gear that created false confidence in remote environments. What happened next would haunt the survivors, and there would be survivors, because the Hallowell family always left witnesses, not by accident, but by design. Fear, after all, was their most effective tool for maintaining the isolation that their operation required. The first screams came from the tent closest to the tree line, where students Josiah Strathmore and Arabella Blackstone had bedded down for the night. Their tent was slashed open in a single fluid motion, the specialized hunting blade creating an opening large enough for a human body to be dragged through without catching on the fabric edges. By the time the other campers had awakened and scrambled from their sleeping bags, 6 of their companions had already been taken. The remaining 2 students, Solomon Pendlebury and Henrietta Clayfield, found themselves alone in a campsite that looked like a tornado had touched down. Gear scattered, tents collapsed, the carefully banked campfire kicked apart and smoldering. But the most terrifying discovery came when they tried to flee the clearing. Every trail had been blocked. Trees had been felled across the main hiking paths, creating barriers that would require hours to circumvent. The family's knowledge of the terrain was absolute. They knew every deer path, every creek crossing, every natural landmark that disoriented campers relied upon for navigation. Pendlebury and Clayfield were trapped in what had become an outdoor prison, surrounded by thousands of acres of wilderness that might as well have been solid walls. The psychological warfare began at dawn. As the surviving students huddled together in the wreckage of their campsite, they heard voices echoing through the forest, their friends' voices, calling for help, screaming in apparent pain, pleading for rescue. But the sounds came from different directions, at different times, with an acoustic quality that suggested they were being projected or recorded. The Hallowell family understood that breaking their prey psychologically was as important as the physical hunt itself. As the sun climbed higher, and the reality of their situation became undeniable, Pendlebury and Clayfield made a discovery that would eventually provide law enforcement with the first concrete evidence of the Kettle Ridge hunting operation. Hidden beneath a fallen log near their destroyed campsite, they found a cache of personal belongings that clearly hadn't come from their group. Wallets, jewelry, cameras, and camping gear bearing the names and addresses of people who had disappeared in these mountains over the past several years. Among the items was a class ring from Matthias Rookwood, a University of Virginia student who had vanished during a solo hiking trip in 1977. His disappearance had been attributed to a climbing accident. His body never recovered. The cache represented trophies, mementos, collected from dozens of previous hunting expeditions. The mountains were full of ghosts. But why leave evidence where survivors could find it? The answer revealed the most chilling aspect of the Hallowell family's operation. They wanted their prey to understand the scope of what they had stumbled into. Fear was more than just a byproduct of their hunting. It was the primary objective. The family had discovered that terrorized survivors made the most effective messengers. When Pendlebury and Clayfield finally managed to escape the mountain trap after 3 days of psychological torment, they would carry with them a story so horrific that it served as a warning to other potential victims. Word would spread through hiking communities, outdoor recreation programs, and adventure tourism networks. The mountains would develop a reputation for danger that went beyond natural hazards. And that reputation would ensure that only the most determined or most foolish would venture into Hallowell hunting grounds. As the second day of their ordeal began, the surviving students heard something that chilled them more than the screams, more than the blocked trails, more than the trophy cache. From somewhere deep in the forest came the sound of methodical preparation, the rhythmic chopping of wood, the scrape of metal against stone, the low murmur of voices planning something terrible. The real hunt was about to begin. Before we go deeper into the nightmare that unfolded on Kettle Ridge, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Stories like this remind us that horror can happen anywhere, at any time. If this investigation is keeping you awake tonight, hit that like button and subscribe, because the worst is yet to come. What the Hallowell family did to their captives during those 3 days would eventually be documented in court testimony, so disturbing that portions of the trial transcript remain sealed to this day. The abandoned mining equipment scattered throughout Kettle Ridge had been repurposed into something far more sinister than its original industrial function. What investigators would later discover was a sophisticated network of traps, blinds, and holding facilities that turned 3,000 acres of wilderness into the most elaborate hunting preserve in American criminal history. The Hallowell family hadn't simply stumbled into their murderous enterprise. They had engineered it with the precision of architects designing a cathedral of terror. The mountain's natural acoustics had been weaponized through decades of careful modification. Mortimer Hallowell's grandfather had discovered that certain rock formations created acoustic chambers where sounds could be captured, amplified, and redirected through natural stone tubes that snaked through the ridge's limestone substrate. By the 1970s, the family had installed a network of metal speaking tubes salvaged from an abandoned coal mine, creating a communication system that allowed them to project voices across miles of terrain. The screams that Solomon Pendlebury and Henrietta Clayfield heard throughout their second day weren't coming from their missing companions. They were recordings, played through speakers powered by car batteries, and hidden in hollow tree trunks throughout the hunting ground. The mountain itself had learned to lie. Verity Ashworth had been documenting the region's acoustic anomalies for her doctoral thesis in environmental geology when she first encountered evidence of the Hallowell operation. Her research into the ridge's limestone cave systems had revealed artificial modifications that didn't match any known mining or logging activity. Metal fixtures embedded in stone walls, electrical wiring running through natural tunnels, and most disturbing of all, scratch marks on cave walls that appeared to have been made by human fingernails. Ashworth's field notes from September 19, 1978, contained observations that would later become crucial evidence. The cave system shows signs of regular human habitation and use. Fresh food waste, recent tire tracks leading to hidden entrances, and what appears to be a ventilation system using both natural airflow and mechanical fans. Someone has turned these caves into a base of operations. She had submitted her findings to the local sheriff's department, but her report was filed away without investigation. The Hallowell family's influence in the region extended far beyond their property lines. They had allies in law enforcement, local government, and the business community, who had reasons to keep certain activities hidden from outside scrutiny. The family's hunting methodology relied on what criminologists would later classify as environmental manipulation, using the terrain itself as a weapon. Every aspect of their operation was designed to exploit the psychological vulnerabilities of people trapped in unfamiliar wilderness. The blocked trails that Pendlebury and Clayfield had discovered were just the beginning of a much more elaborate system of control. Motion sensors salvaged from military surplus stores had been installed along every major deer path and hiking trail. These devices, originally designed to detect enemy movement in Vietnam, allowed the Hallowell family to track their prey's movements in real time. When motion was detected, signals were transmitted to receivers hidden throughout the family's compound, alerting them to exactly where their targets were located at any given moment. The technology gave them an overwhelming advantage over people who believed they were hiding in the wilderness. Randolph Thornfield, an electronics specialist who had worked on the family's property as a hunting guide, later testified about the sophistication of their surveillance network. They had equipment that the military would have envied, he told investigators. Night vision scopes, radio communication systems, even primitive GPS units that they'd acquired through black market contacts. These weren't backwoods hillbillies stumbling around in the dark. They were running a high-tech operation. The hunting compound itself occupied a natural depression in the ridge that was invisible from aerial surveys and completely hidden from ground-level observation. 3 generations of Hallowells had carved living spaces, workshops, and storage facilities into the limestone cliff faces, creating an underground complex that could house the entire extended family plus their captives. Darkness beneath darkness. The compound's most disturbing feature was what the family called the processing facility, a series of interconnected chambers where their human prey was held, interrogated, and ultimately disposed of. Former family member Clementine Bramwell, who eventually testified against her relatives in exchange for immunity, provided the only detailed description of these underground chambers. Each room served a specific purpose, she told investigators during her videotaped confession in December 1979. The holding cells were carved into solid rock, with drainage systems that led to underground streams. The interrogation room had acoustics, designed to amplify screams, both to break down the prisoners and to record their voices for later psychological warfare. And the disposal chamber, that connected to natural underground waterways that carried evidence miles downstream. The family had spent decades perfecting their methods of extracting information from captives before killing them. They wanted to know about their victims' families, their plans, their expected return dates. This intelligence allowed them to craft cover stories that would delay search and rescue operations for weeks or even months. Parents calling to check on their college-age children would receive phone calls from people claiming to be park rangers or local authorities, explaining that their son or daughter had decided to extend their camping trip and couldn't be reached by phone due to poor reception in remote areas. These calls bought the family precious time to complete their hunting cycles and dispose of evidence. The psychological profiles that investigators later assembled revealed that the Hallowell family members had developed distinct roles within their hunting operation. Mortimer served as the strategist, planning operations and managing their network of informants. His sons handled the technical aspects, surveillance, communication, and equipment maintenance. The women in the family, particularly Mortimer's daughters and daughters-in-law, specialized in psychological manipulation and information extraction. This division of labor had allowed them to operate for years without detection, because no single family member possessed enough knowledge to expose the entire operation if captured. During the morning of their 3rd day in captivity, Pendlebury and Clayfield heard something that revealed the true scope of what they had stumbled into. From the direction of the compound, carried on the mountain wind, came the sound of multiple vehicles arriving, engines shutting off, car doors slamming, and most chilling of all, the voices of people who sounded like they were attending a social gathering. The Hallowell family had invited guests to witness the final phase of their hunt. Law enforcement would later discover that the family had developed a network of clients, wealthy individuals from across the eastern United States who paid substantial sums for the opportunity to participate in what they euphemistically called extreme hunting experiences. These clients believed they were paying for the chance to hunt dangerous game in a controlled environment. They had no idea that the game consisted of terrified college students. The client list, when it was finally recovered during raids on the compound, included names that shocked investigators. Prominent businessmen, political figures, and even some law enforcement officials had participated in the Hallowell family's hunting operations over the years. Evil had a subscription service, The sound of arriving vehicles marked the beginning of what the family called the final hunt, a ritualized chase where their human prey would be released into a predetermined section of the mountain and pursued by paying clients who believed they were participating in an elaborate survival game. The clients were told that their targets were willing participants, volunteers who had agreed to be hunted in exchange for substantial payment. The elaborate deception allowed the family to maintain plausible deniability while providing their clients with the thrill of hunting human beings without the moral burden of knowing they were committing murder. As the voices grew louder and more numerous, Pendlebury and Clayfield realized that their ordeal was about to enter a new and far more dangerous phase. The psychological warfare had been preparation. Now, they would face actual hunters armed with real weapons and motivated by the prospect of the ultimate trophy. The mountains around them were about to become a killing ground, where the only rules were survival and the only prize was making it out alive. But the Hallowell family had spent decades ensuring that no prey ever escaped their mountain, and they had never failed to deliver on their promises to paying clients. What made the clients believe this hunt would be any different? The hunting party that assembled at the Hallowell compound on the morning of March 18, 1979, included 3 federal judges, 2 state legislators, a prominent Louisville banker, and the owner of Kentucky's largest construction company. They had each paid $50,000 for what they believed was an exclusive human tracking experience featuring willing participants in an elaborate survival exercise. The deception that allowed wealthy professionals to become accessories to murder reveals how easily ordinary people can be manipulated into participating in unspeakable acts when the right psychological frameworks are provided. Federal Judge Matthias Rookwood arrived at the compound driving a rented pickup truck loaded with high-end hunting equipment. His briefcase contained legal documents that he believed established the legitimacy of the operation liability waivers, participant consent forms, and insurance policies that appeared to cover every aspect of what he understood to be an extreme outdoor adventure company. The paperwork was sophisticated enough to convince a federal judge that the operation was legal, regulated, and ethically managed. The Hallowell family had spent years developing this facade of legitimacy. They maintained business licenses, filed tax returns, and even carried liability insurance through shell companies that existed solely to provide legal cover for their hunting operation. Their attention to bureaucratic detail was so thorough that several state agencies had actually issued commendations for their contributions to Kentucky's outdoor recreation industry. Monsters hiding in plain sight. Mortimer Hallowell addressed the assembled clients in what he called the briefing chamber, a natural cavern that had been converted into a rustic conference room complete with topographical maps, equipment displays, and a presentation screen powered by a portable generator. His explanation of the day's activities was a masterpiece of calculated deception. The participants you'll be tracking are experienced outdoors enthusiasts who have volunteered for this exercise as part of an extreme survival training program, he explained to the assembled hunters. They've been equipped with basic survival gear and given a 12-hour head start. Your objective is to locate and apprehend them using only the equipment and techniques we've discussed. They understand that this is a competitive exercise and that you represent the opposing team in a high-stakes survival scenario. The clients ask detailed questions about rules of engagement, safety protocols, and what would happen to the participants once they were captured. Hallowell's answers were carefully crafted to satisfy their legal and ethical concerns while concealing the true nature of what they were about to do. State Senator Verity Ashworth had participated in similar exercises at exclusive hunting lodges in Montana and Alaska. She later told investigators that everything about the Hallowell operation appeared professional and legitimate. The equipment was military grade. The briefings were thorough, and they had documentation for everything, she testified. It never occurred to me that the people we were hunting hadn't volunteered to be there. The psychological manipulation that transformed law-abiding citizens into willing participants in human hunting relied on several key elements. First, the clients were isolated from outside communication and immersed in an environment where the Hallowell family's version of reality was the only available truth. Second, they were provided with an elaborate framework of rules and procedures that made their actions seem regulated and legitimate. Finally, they were gradually escalated into increasingly aggressive behavior through a series of small compromises that eventually led to active participation in murder. The process began during the equipment selection phase, when clients were encouraged to choose weapons that were supposedly designed for non-lethal apprehension. The tranquilizer darts, net guns, and electronic stunning devices were presented as humane alternatives to traditional hunting weapons. What the clients didn't know was that these non-lethal weapons had been modified to deliver potentially fatal doses of drugs or electrical current. Banker Randolph Thornfield selected what he believed was a tranquilizer rifle loaded with sedative darts. The weapon had actually been loaded with a veterinary euthanasia drug that would kill a human being within minutes of injection. The Hallowell family's weapons expert had assured him that the sedatives would simply render the targets unconscious for several hours. "I thought I was participating in something similar to paintball or laser tag," Thornfield later testified. "Just with higher stakes and more realistic equipment, the idea that we were actually going to kill people never entered my mind." Death dressed as a game. The release of Solomon Pendlebury and Henrietta Clayfield into the hunting ground was orchestrated with theatrical precision. They were awakened before dawn by armed family members, fitted with electronic tracking collars that they were told contained GPS units and emergency beacons, and led to a predetermined starting point deep in the mountain wilderness. Mortimer Hallowell personally delivered what he called the rules briefing to the terrified college students. "This is a survival exercise," he told them, his voice calm and authoritative. "You have experienced outdoors enthusiasts tracking you through approximately 10 square miles of mountain terrain. Your objective is to evade capture for 24 hours. If you succeed, you'll be released unharmed and compensated for your participation. If you're captured, you'll be detained until the exercise concludes." The electronic collars around their necks were not GPS units. They were explosive devices that could be detonated remotely if the students attempted to leave the designated hunting area or remove the collars. The Hallowell family had learned that their human prey performed better when they believed they had a chance of survival, so they always provided hope along with the rules. Pendlebury and Clayfield were given a 30-minute head start and basic survival supplies: a compass, a topographical map marked with the boundaries of the exercise area, energy bars, water purification tablets, and a first aid kit. They were told that the tracking team would be using non-lethal capture methods and that they would not be harmed if they cooperated when apprehended. The students had no way of knowing that the map they'd been given contained subtle inaccuracies designed to funnel them toward predetermined ambush points, or that the exercise area had been seeded with motion sensors and hidden cameras that would broadcast their every movement to the hunting party. As they fled into the pre-dawn darkness, their electronic collars transmitted their location every 30 seconds to receivers carried by the clients who were preparing to begin their hunt. The local community's role in enabling the Hallowell operation extended far beyond passive ignorance. For decades, residents of the mountain communities surrounding Kettle Ridge had actively participated in covering up evidence of the family's activities. Missing persons reports were discouraged. Search and rescue operations were delayed or misdirected, and witnesses who asked too many questions often found themselves facing economic or social pressure to remain silent. Dr. Clementine Bramwell, who served as the region's only medical examiner, had signed death certificates for dozens of people who had never actually been found. When questioned by state investigators about these irregularities, she initially claimed that the certificates were based on reasonable assumptions about people who had disappeared in dangerous mountain terrain. The truth was more disturbing. Bramwell had been receiving substantial payments from the Hallowell family to provide official documentation that supported their cover stories. Missing hikers were officially declared dead from exposure or accidents, eliminating the need for extended search operations that might have uncovered evidence of the hunting ground. What would you do if your entire community's economic survival depended on looking the other way? Bramwell asked investigators during her eventual confession. The Hallowell family employed half the people in 3 counties. They owned businesses, provided jobs, supported local charities. Asking questions about their activities meant risking everything your family depended on. Complicity purchased with paychecks. The economic influence that allowed the Hallowell family to operate with impunity extended throughout eastern Kentucky's political and business establishment. They owned logging companies, construction firms, and equipment rental businesses that provided employment for thousands of people. Local politicians, law enforcement officials, and business leaders had compelling financial reasons to avoid scrutinizing the family's activities too closely. This network of economic dependence created what sociologists would later classify as institutionalized enabling, a situation where an entire community becomes complicit in criminal activity because the social and economic costs of intervention are perceived as greater than the moral costs of complicity. As the hunting party prepared to begin their pursuit of Pendlebury and Clayfield, radio communications crackled through the mountain air with updates on the students' movements. The clients had been equipped with military-style communication equipment and night vision gear that gave them overwhelming technological advantages over their prey. The hunt that was about to begin would test not just the survival skills of 2 terrified college students, but the moral boundaries of supposedly respectable citizens who believed they were participating in an elaborate game. How far would they go when the game became real? The first shot, fired at 6:43 a.m., sent a flock of crows exploding from the canopy like scattered ink against the dawn sky. Solomon Pendlebury felt the tranquilizer dart whistle past his ear and embed itself in an oak tree with enough force to penetrate 2 inches of bark. What the wealthy clients believed would be a controlled tracking exercise had just escalated into a life-or-death chase through terrain that offered no sanctuary and no escape. The mountain's morning mist clung to the hollows between ridges, creating a gray shroud that muffled sound and distorted distances. Every footstep seemed to echo from multiple directions, making it impossible for Pendlebury and Clayfield to determine how many hunters were pursuing them or how close they might be. The forest floor beneath their feet was carpeted with wet leaves that released the sharp scent of decay with every hurried step, while thorns from wild rose bushes caught at their clothing like grasping fingers. Federal Judge Matthias Rookwood had fired the first shot, aiming what he believed was a non-lethal sedative dart at what his night vision scope showed as a fleeing figure approximately 200 yards ahead. His military surplus rifle was equipped with a laser sight and sound suppressor, giving him the technological advantage of a professional sniper while maintaining the legal fiction that he was participating in a survival game. The dart that missed Pendlebury by inches contained enough veterinary euthanasia drug to kill a horse within minutes of injection. Rookwood's radio crackled with congratulations from other members of the hunting party. "Nice shooting, Judge," came the voice of construction company owner Obadiah Wentworth. "You've got them moving now. They're heading southeast toward the creek bed, exactly where Mortimer said they would go." The electronic tracking collars around the students' necks were transmitting their location every 30 seconds to handheld receivers carried by each client. The technology removed any element of actual tracking skill from the hunt, reducing it to a simple matter of following electronic signals to predetermined coordinates. Technology serving murder. State Senator Verity Ashworth was experiencing the first stirrings of doubt about the operation as she followed the electronic signal through increasingly difficult terrain. Her non-lethal net launcher had been loaded with weighted projectiles designed to entangle and immobilize targets, but the weights were actually small explosive devices that would detonate on impact. The participants seemed genuinely terrified, she radioed to Mortimer Hallowell at the command center. Are you certain they understand this is an exercise? Hallowell's response was carefully crafted to maintain the illusion while dismissing her concerns. Terror is the point, Senator. These people have paid substantial sums to experience authentic survival stress. We've found that participants who believe they're in real danger perform much better and provide a more challenging experience for our clients. The psychological manipulation that kept the clients engaged, despite mounting evidence of the operation's true nature, relied on what behavioral psychologists call cognitive dissonance resolution. When confronted with information that contradicted their beliefs about the situation, the clients were provided with alternative explanations that preserved their sense of moral legitimacy while allowing them to continue participating. Dr. Emmeline Fairhurst, a psychology professor who would later study the Hallowell case extensively, identified several key factors that enabled ordinary citizens to participate in human hunting. The clients were isolated from outside perspectives, provided with authority figures who validated their actions, and given gradual escalation that prevented them from recognizing moral boundaries as they crossed them, she explained in her landmark study of the case. The terrain through which Pendlebury and Clayfield fled had been carefully designed to funnel them toward predetermined ambush points where multiple hunters could coordinate their attacks. Natural barriers like cliff faces and dense thickets had been supplemented with artificial obstacles, fallen trees that blocked certain paths, concealed pitfall traps that forced the students to choose specific routes, and electronic motion sensors that triggered audio recordings designed to simulate the presence of additional hunters. By 8:15 a.m., the students had been driven into what the Hallowell family called the killing box, a natural depression surrounded by steep slopes that offered only 3 possible escape routes, all of which led to prepared ambush positions. Banker Randolph Thornfield positioned himself at the southern exit, his modified tranquilizer rifle trained on a gap between 2 limestone boulders. Louisville businessman Josiah Strathmore covered the eastern approach with what he believed was an electronic stunning device, but was actually a cattle prod modified to deliver potentially fatal electrical shocks. The northern exit was covered by Arabella Blackstone, wife of a prominent federal prosecutor who had been equipped with what she thought were rubber bullets, but were actually hollow point rounds designed to cause maximum tissue damage. As the students entered the depression, motion sensors triggered a sophisticated audio system that created the illusion of hunters approaching from all directions. Recorded voices called out tactical commands, footsteps echoed from hidden speakers, and the distinctive metallic sounds of weapons being readied seemed to come from everywhere at once. The mountain had learned to hunt. The first client to realize that something was fundamentally wrong with the operation was Dr. Solomon Pendlebury's namesake, a physician from Lexington, who had noticed that his tranquilizer darts were labeled with veterinary euthanasia drugs rather than sedatives. Mortimer, he radioed to the command center, his voice tense with growing suspicion. These aren't sedative darts. The vials are labeled with pentobarbital, that's a lethal injection drug. Hallowell's response revealed the careful planning that had gone into managing this exact scenario. Doctor, you're looking at specialized veterinary sedatives that require different labeling due to DEA regulations. The concentration has been adjusted for human subjects. Trust me, we've been running these exercises for years without a single fatality. The explanation satisfied the physician's immediate concerns, while introducing a new element of doubt that would continue to erode his confidence throughout the hunt. This was exactly the psychological dynamic the Hallowell family had learned to exploit, keeping their clients confused and dependent on authority figures for moral guidance. Henrietta Clayfield was the first student to reach the northern exit of the killing box, where she encountered Arabella Blackstone positioned behind a camouflaged hunting blind with her modified rifle. The confrontation that followed would later be captured on the hunting party's helmet-mounted cameras, providing law enforcement with the first direct evidence of how the operation's psychological manipulation functioned in real time. "Please," Clayfield begged, her hands raised in surrender. "I don't understand what's happening. This isn't a game, is it? You're really trying to kill us." Blackstone's response, recorded on multiple cameras, revealed the cognitive dissonance that was protecting her from recognizing the reality of what she was doing. "This is part of the exercise," she told the terrified student. "You're supposed to try to convince us that it's real. That's what makes it challenging." When Clayfield continued to plead for her life, insisting that she had never volunteered for any survival exercise, Blackstone's resolve began to waver. The rubber bullets in her rifle were supposed to be non-lethal, but the impact of shooting another human being, even with supposedly safe ammunition, was forcing her to confront the reality of what she was participating in. The moment of truth came when Clayfield tried to run past the hunting blind. Blackstone pulled the trigger, firing what she believed was a rubber bullet, but was actually a hollow point round that struck the student in the shoulder and sent her tumbling down a steep embankment. The sound of genuine screaming, the sight of real blood, and the unmistakable evidence of serious injury shattered the psychological framework that had allowed Blackstone to participate in the hunt. "She's really hurt," Blackstone radioed frantically to the command center. "That wasn't supposed to happen. We need medical assistance immediately." But medical assistance wasn't coming, because this had never been a game. What happens when the comfortable lies collapse and wealthy professionals realize they've become accessories to murder? The blood pooling beneath Henrietta Clayfield's motionless body was too red, too real, and spreading too fast for anyone to maintain the fiction that this was an elaborate survival exercise. Arabella Blackstone dropped her rifle and scrambled down the embankment, her expensive hunting boots slipping on wet limestone, as the comfortable lies that had sustained her participation crumbled into horrifying clarity. The moment when ordinary people realize they've become accessories to murder reveals the true fragility of the psychological barriers that separate civilization from savagery. The forest around the killing box erupted in panicked radio chatter as other members of the hunting party processed what Blackstone's frantic transmissions meant. Federal Judge Matthias Rookwood's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling courtrooms, but his words carried an unmistakable tremor of fear. "All hunters, cease fire immediately. We have a medical emergency that requires immediate evacuation." But evacuation wasn't possible. The Hallowell family had spent decades ensuring that their hunting ground offered no quick escape routes for anyone, including clients who might develop sudden attacks of conscience. Dr. Solomon Pendlebury, the physician who had earlier questioned his tranquilizer darts, reached Clayfield's position first. His medical training allowed him to assess her condition with clinical precision that cut through the emotional chaos surrounding them. The hollow point bullet had shattered her shoulder blade, severed major blood vessels, and created internal injuries that required immediate surgical intervention to prevent death from blood loss. "She needs a trauma center within the next hour, or she's going to die," he announced over the radio network. "This isn't a flesh wound or a training accident. This is a potentially fatal gunshot injury caused by live ammunition." The silence that followed his assessment lasted exactly 11 seconds, long enough for every member of the hunting party to understand that their comfortable assumptions about the operation had been completely wrong. Mortimer Hallowell's response from the command center was delivered in the same calm, authoritative tone he had used throughout the operation. "Doctor, please remember that panic doesn't help anyone in emergency situations. We have medical evacuation procedures in place for exactly these scenarios. Begin first aid protocols while we coordinate helicopter transport." There was no helicopter. The psychological manipulation that had sustained the client's participation required constant reinforcement to prevent exactly the kind of reality breakthrough they were now experiencing. Hallowell understood that he had perhaps 30 minutes before the entire operation collapsed into chaos. taking with it decades of careful planning and millions of dollars in infrastructure. His solution was to accelerate the timeline and eliminate the witnesses, all of them. State Senator Verity Ashworth was positioned at the eastern exit of the killing box when she received new instructions that revealed the operation's true nature. "Senator, we have a Code 7 situation," came Hallowell's voice through her radio headset. "All participants need to be neutralized before outside authorities can be contacted. Use live ammunition and confirm all targets are down." The military terminology and casual reference to neutralizing participants shattered the last vestiges of Ashworth's belief that she was involved in a legitimate survival exercise. The horrible truth crashed over her like ice water. She had paid $50,000 to participate in the systematic murder of innocent college students. Her response would later be cited by behavioral psychologists as a perfect example of how different personality types react when forced to confront their participation in atrocities. Instead of continuing to follow orders or attempting to rationalize her actions, Ashworth made an immediate decision to switch sides. "Attention all students," she broadcast over the hunting party's radio network, her voice carrying the authority of her political office. "This is not an exercise. These people are trying to kill you. The weapons are real, the ammunition is live, and you need to run. Now." Banker Randolph Thornfield's reaction to Ashworth's warning revealed a different psychological response to moral crisis. Rather than accepting responsibility for his participation, he began constructing elaborate justifications that would allow him to continue believing he was the victim of deception rather than a willing participant in murder. "She's lost her mind," he radioed to other members of the hunting party. "The stress has broken her. We need to complete the exercise as planned and get these people to medical attention. Following the protocols is the only way to ensure everyone's safety." The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this position in the face of overwhelming contrary evidence demonstrated the extraordinary lengths people will go to avoid confronting their own capacity for evil. Construction company owner Obadiah Wentworth had positioned himself at the western edge of the hunting area when Solomon Pendlebury burst from the tree line, running at full speed, with blood streaming from multiple superficial wounds. The college student had been grazed by several non-lethal projectiles that had torn through his clothing and skin, leaving no doubt about the lethal nature of the weapons being used against him. The confrontation between Wentworth and Pendlebury would later be reconstructed from radio transmissions, helmet camera footage, and physical evidence found at the scene. It represented the moment when the Hallowell operation's carefully constructed psychology finally collapsed completely. "Please don't shoot me," Pendlebury begged as he stumbled into Wentworth's position. "I don't know what this is about, but we never agreed to participate in anything. We were kidnapped. Our friends are dead. You have to help us." Wentworth's response revealed the fundamental moral choice that every client faced when confronted with undeniable evidence of what they were participating in. He could acknowledge the truth and attempt to help the students escape, or he could complete the transformation from unwitting accomplice to conscious murderer. He chose murder. The modified tranquilizer dart that Wentworth fired at point-blank range contained enough veterinary euthanasia drug to kill Pendlebury within minutes. But the young man's desperate dive to avoid the shot caused the dart to strike a tree trunk instead of human flesh, and he disappeared into a thicket of mountain laurel before Wentworth could reload. Conscience had a price tag. The radio chatter that followed Pendlebury's escape revealed how quickly the psychological framework that had enabled the client's participation was disintegrating. Federal Judge Rookwood attempted to assert legal authority over the situation, demanding that the operation cease immediately and that all participants be evacuated for medical attention and debriefing. His commands were met with silence from the Hallowell family's command center. Louisville businessman Josiah Strathmore had reached the position where Henrietta Clayfield lay bleeding when he received the transmission that confirmed his worst fears about the operation. "Doctor, Pendlebury's voice, transmitted from his makeshift first aid position, was clinically precise and utterly damning. Her injuries are consistent with high-velocity projectile trauma from military-grade ammunition, the physician reported. These are not rubber bullets, tranquilizer darts, or any form of non-lethal ordnance. Someone loaded our weapons with live rounds designed to kill human beings. The implications were immediate and terrifying. If their weapons contained live ammunition, then every shot they had fired during the hunt had been a genuine murder attempt. The survival exercise they had believed they were participating in was actually a systematic execution carried out by people who had paid for the privilege of killing other human beings. Strathmore's psychological response to this revelation would later be studied as an example of how financial investment in criminal activity creates resistance to moral awakening. He had paid $50,000 for the hunting experience and had been promised exclusive access to future operations. The sunk cost of his investment made it psychologically easier to rationalize continuing the hunt rather than accepting that he had been defrauded and manipulated into attempted murder. "The protocols are clear," he radioed to other clients. "We complete the exercise as planned. Any deviation from established procedures puts everyone at risk. But protocols written by murderers serve only murder." As the afternoon sun climbed higher and cast sharp shadows through the forest canopy, the surviving members of both groups, hunters and prey, found themselves trapped in a mountain that had become a battlefield where the only rules were survival and the only law was the willingness to kill. The Hallowell family was about to discover that some of their clients had stronger stomachs for murder than others, while the college students would learn that their only hope of survival lay in turning their hunters against each other. What happens when predators begin hunting each other? By 3:27 p.m., the electronic tracking system that had given the hunting party their overwhelming advantage became the instrument of their destruction. When State Senator Verity Ashworth began using the client's own radio network to coordinate a rescue operation that transformed prey into predators. The technology designed to facilitate murder was now being weaponized against the murderers themselves, a reversal that the Hallowell family had never anticipated in their decades of careful planning. The mountain air crackled with contradictory radio transmissions as the hunting party fractured into competing factions. Dr. Solomon Pendlebury, the physician who had first questioned the tranquilizer darts, was broadcasting medical instructions to help the wounded students while simultaneously coordinating with Ashworth to identify the locations of clients who were still following Mortimer Hallowell's kill orders. Federal Judge Rookwood is positioned at grid reference 77 Alpha Ashworth, transmitted over the emergency channel she had established. He's armed with a modified sniper rifle and has expressed intent to eliminate all witnesses to preserve what he calls operational security. Consider him extremely dangerous. The transformation of wealthy professionals into desperate fugitives revealed how quickly civilized behavior collapses when people realize their crimes have been documented and their legal immunity has evaporated. Banker Randolph Thornfield had barricaded himself in a camouflaged hunting blind, using his military surplus equipment to establish what he called a defensive perimeter around his position. His radio transmissions grew increasingly paranoid as the afternoon wore on, revealing a mind struggling to process the collapse of his comfortable worldview. "They're trying to frame us," he broadcast to anyone still listening on the original hunting frequency. The students were supposed to be willing participants. Someone changed the rules without telling us. This is entrapment, not murder. Delusion armed with hollow points. Construction company owner Obadiah Wentworth had made the opposite choice, embracing the reality of what the operation had always been and committing fully to eliminating the evidence of his participation. His background in heavy construction had given him practical knowledge of explosives, and he had begun mining the forest trails with improvised devices created from hunting supplies and blasting caps he'd brought for what he thought would be demolition-themed survival challenges. The mountain was becoming a battlefield, where the rules changed every hour and former allies became mortal enemies based on their willingness to accept responsibility for their actions. Louisville businessman Josiah Strathmore encountered Solomon Pendlebury near the abandoned mining equipment that had been converted into part of the Hallowell family's surveillance network. The confrontation between them would later be reconstructed from radio intercepts and physical evidence, providing investigators with insight into how differently people respond when forced to choose between conscience and self-preservation. "You don't understand the position you've put us in," Strathmore told the wounded college student. "We came here believing this was a legal operation. Now we're all accessories to attempted murder because someone lied to us about the nature of the exercise." Pendlebury's response, recorded on Strathmore's helmet camera, revealed the moral clarity that can emerge from extreme trauma. "You paid $50,000 to hunt human beings for sport," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries. "Maybe you didn't know we were unwilling, but you knew we were people. What did you think that made you?" The question that followed, what transforms a businessman into a killer, was answered when Strathmore raised his modified tranquilizer rifle and fired a lethal dart at point-blank range. Pendlebury's desperate role behind a rusted mining cart saved his life, but the miss sent Strathmore into a rage that revealed the psychological pressure he was under. "I'm not a killer," he screamed, firing repeatedly at the mining equipment. "I'm a victim of fraud. None of this was supposed to happen." Federal Judge Matthias Rookwood had established what he called a mobile command post, using his legal training to develop strategies for managing what he insisted on calling the crisis situation. His radio transmissions revealed a mind attempting to apply courtroom logic to a situation that had moved far beyond legal frameworks. "All parties need to understand that we have a duty to minimize casualties and preserve evidence for proper legal proceedings," he broadcast to both the remaining clients and the Hallowell family's command center. "I'm prepared to grant immunity to anyone who cooperates with an orderly resolution of this incident." But immunity meant nothing to people who were already dead. The Hallowell family's response to the collapse of their operation revealed the true scope of their preparedness for this exact scenario. Mortimer Hallowell's voice, when it finally returned to the radio network, carried the calm authority of someone who had planned for the possibility that clients might develop inconvenient consciences. "All hunting parties should be advised that extraction protocols are now in effect," he announced. "Transportation to the secondary facility will begin at 1600 hours. Participation in extraction is mandatory for all personnel who wish to avoid complications with outside authorities." The secondary facility was the disposal site. Dr. Emmeline Fairhurst, the psychology professor whose research would later examine the Hallowell case, identified this moment as the point where the operation's psychological manipulation achieved its final form. The clients were being offered a choice between certain death and complicit participation in covering up their crimes, she explained. For people who had already crossed the line into attempted murder, cooperation with disposal protocols seemed like the lesser evil. The transportation that arrived at the compound consisted of heavy equipment, trucks loaded with industrial wood chippers, lime, and plastic sheeting tools designed to eliminate all evidence of the hunting operation, including the clients who had participated in it. Arabella Blackstone, who had been attempting to provide first aid to Henrietta Clayfield, realized the true implications when she saw the disposal equipment being unloaded. Her radio transmission to the other clients revealed the final horror of what they had stumbled into. "They're not planning to let us leave," she broadcast frantically. "The extraction isn't transportation home, it's transportation to a mass grave. We're witnesses to their operation. They can't afford to let us live, any more than they could afford to let the students live." The psychological framework that had sustained the hunting operation for decades was designed to culminate in exactly this scenario. The client's gradual escalation from willing participants to desperate conspirators ensured that they would be completely dependent on the Hallowell family for protection from legal consequences. And that dependence made them vulnerable to elimination when they became more liability than asset. State Senator Verity Ashworth's background in crisis management served her well as she recognized the tactical situation they were facing. Her radio broadcast to all surviving participants, clients and students alike, represented the first realistic assessment of their circumstances. "Everyone needs to understand our situation clearly," she announced. "The Hallowell family has been documenting our participation in this operation. They have helmet camera footage of us shooting at students with live ammunition. They have our voices on radio recordings discussing target elimination. We are all potential murder charges waiting to happen, and the only people who can protect us from prosecution are the same people who are now trying to kill us." The alliance that formed between former hunters and their intended prey represented a complete reversal of the power dynamics that had sustained the operation. Clients who hours earlier had been tracking college students through night vision scopes were now coordinating defensive positions and sharing ammunition with the people they had been trying to murder. The mountain that had been carefully engineered as a hunting ground was about to become a siege site where the distinction between predator and prey would be determined by who was willing to kill first and who was prepared to die fighting. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, painting the forest in shades of red that seemed prophetic, the sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the hollows. But these were not rescue aircraft. The Hallowell family was implementing the final phase of their contingency plan, and no one who had entered their mountain was intended to leave it alive. What happens when the hunters realize they've always been the prey? The helicopters that descended through the evening mist carried not rescue teams, but elimination squads equipped with military-grade weapons and body disposal equipment. Marking the final phase of a contingency plan, the Hallowell family had rehearsed for decades, but never expected to implement. When wealthy clients become inconvenient witnesses, even the most elaborate psychological manipulation must give way to bullets and shallow graves. The coordinated assault on the fractured hunting party began at 17:41 p.m. with suppressed sniper fire from helicopters equipped with thermal imaging systems. Federal Judge Matthias Rookwood was the first to fall, struck down while attempting to establish radio contact with outside authorities from his elevated position near the abandoned mining equipment. The hollow point round that killed him had been fired by his own nephew, Marcus Rookwood, a former Army Ranger who had joined the Hallowell family's enforcement division after returning from Afghanistan. State Senator Verity Ashworth watched through her rifle scope as 3 more clients were systematically eliminated by aerial marksmen who knew the terrain better than their targets knew their own backyards. The psychological manipulation that had sustained the hunting operation was being replaced by simple, efficient murder, carried out by professionals who felt no need to maintain comforting illusions about their work. The mountain's cleaning house, she radioed to the surviving students and clients who had formed an uneasy alliance in the ruins of what had been their hunting ground. "They're killing everyone who can testify about what happened here." The sound of approaching ground forces crashing through the underbrush confirmed what Ashworth had realized. Hours earlier, the Hallowell family's operation was designed to eliminate all witnesses, regardless of whether they had been predators or prey. No one leaves the mountain. Dr. Solomon Pendlebury, the physician whose medical expertise had kept several wounded survivors alive throughout the afternoon, made a discovery that revealed the true scope of the Hallowell family's preparation for mass elimination. Hidden beneath the forest floor were pre-positioned caches of lime, industrial acid, and portable cremation equipment that could reduce dozens of human bodies to untraceable ash within hours. The operation that wealthy clients had believed was an exclusive hunting experience had always been designed as an elaborate murder-suicide that would eliminate all evidence of the family's decades-long criminal enterprise. Construction company owner Obadiah Wentworth's background in demolitions served him well as he recognized the tactical situation they were facing. His radio transmission to the remaining survivors revealed both their desperate circumstances and the only strategy that might allow some of them to escape. "They've got us surrounded, but they need to recover the bodies to maintain operational security," he broadcast from his fortified position. "If we can create enough chaos and casualties among their cleanup crew, some of us might make it to the state highway before they can establish a perimeter." The alliance between former hunters and their intended prey achieved its full evolution when banker Randolph Thornfield, who had spent the afternoon in psychological denial about his participation in attempted murder, emerged from his hiding place carrying a briefcase full of explosive devices he had assembled from hunting supplies and mining equipment. "I'm not going to die for someone else's operation," he announced over the radio network. "If we're all going to hell, I'm taking as many of them with me as possible." The first explosion occurred at 18:23 p.m. when Thornfield's improvised device destroyed one of the Hallowell family's ground vehicles, along with its three-man crew. The blast echoed through the mountain hollows like thunder, followed immediately by automatic weapons fire as the family's elimination teams attempted to suppress what they now realized was an organized resistance. Louisville businessman Josiah Strathmore had spent the afternoon wrestling with his conscience over his attempts to murder Solomon Pendlebury, but the sight of helicopters firing on civilians crystallized his moral position with remarkable clarity. His final radio transmission, broadcast moments before he charged an armed helicopter with nothing but a hunting knife, revealed the psychological transformation that extreme circumstances can produce in ordinary people. "I came here thinking I was going to hunt animals," he said, his voice steady despite the gunfire erupting around him. "I'm leaving knowing I became one, but at least I can choose what kind of animal I die as." The helicopter he attacked crashed into the tree line, its fuel tanks igniting a forest fire that would burn for 6 days and provide the smoke cover that allowed 3 survivors to escape the mountain. Arabella Blackstone, who had been attempting to save Henrietta Clayfield's life since the afternoon shooting, made the decision that would ultimately expose the Hallowell operation to federal authorities. Instead of attempting to flee with the other survivors, she remained hidden near the compound's communications center, using equipment she had learned to operate during her husband's federal law enforcement career. Her systematic transmission of the hunting party's helmet camera footage, radio recordings, and GPS coordinates to every emergency frequency she could access ensured that evidence of the operation would survive, even if none of the witnesses did. The 3 survivors who eventually made it off the mountain, State Senator Verity Ashworth, college student Solomon Pendlebury, and Dr. Emmeline Fairhurst, carried with them documentation that would lead to the largest federal investigation of organized crime in Kentucky history. Justice crawling out of hell. The FBI raid on the Hallowell compound, 6 days later, uncovered evidence of 43 murders committed over a span of 27 years. The underground facility contained personal belongings from hundreds of missing persons, detailed records of client participation in hunting operations, and video recordings that documented the systematic murder of people who had believed they were participating in legitimate outdoor adventures. Mortimer Hallowell's body was found in the compound's command center, killed by a single gunshot wound that investigators determined was self-inflicted moments before federal agents breached the facility. His suicide note contained a single sentence: "The mountain provided, and the mountain reclaimed." The trials that followed would eventually convict 17 family members and associates, while exposing a network of wealthy clients whose participation had enabled the operation for decades. The client list, when it was finally made public, included names that shocked the nation and led to resignations, criminal prosecutions, and civil lawsuits that continued for years. But the most disturbing discovery came during the excavation of the compound's disposal sites, where forensic teams uncovered evidence suggesting that the Hallowell operation had been just one node in a larger network of similar hunting facilities operating throughout the Appalachian region. The investigation revealed financial connections between the Hallowell family and similar operations in West Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, suggesting that wealthy clients could purchase hunting experiences at multiple locations as part of what prosecutors called a subscription service for serial murder. State Senator Verity Ashworth's survival and subsequent testimony led to her appointment as head of a federal task force investigating organized hunting operations throughout the eastern United States. Her work would eventually identify 12 similar facilities and result in the prosecution of more than 200 individuals involved in what became known as the Appalachian Hunting Network. The psychological evaluation of surviving clients revealed patterns that would influence criminal psychology for decades. Dr. Sess, Emmeline Fairhurst's research into how wealthy professionals could be manipulated into participating in systematic murder became required reading in law enforcement academies and graduate psychology programs. The remote mountain clearing where the Fairhurst College students had established their final campsite was declared a federal crime scene and remains closed to the public. Forest Service rangers report that hiking trails in the area are frequently blocked by fallen trees that seem to fall in patterns too deliberate to be natural, and that electronic equipment often malfunctions near the former compound site. The cases that emerged from the Appalachian Hunting Network investigation would fill law enforcement databases for years, but one question remained unanswered. How many similar operations continue to function in remote areas where wealthy predators can still purchase the ultimate hunting experience? Local residents still report seeing helicopters flying unusual patterns over remote mountain areas, and missing persons cases involving outdoor enthusiasts continue to spike in regions where wealthy individuals own large tracts of isolated land. Even today, park rangers in eastern Kentucky warn hikers that some mountains remain hungry and that the screams echoing through certain hollows on moonless nights aren't coming from any animal that appears in field guides. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.